To order, Madam Clerk, the roll call.
Your Worship, all members of Council are present this evening, with the exception of Lubberts.
Thank you. We begin this meeting by acknowledging that the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, the Mississaugas of the New Credit, and the Anishinaabe people. There are no announcements this evening, nor is there any addendum. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? There being none, I'm going to hand the chair over to the Chair of the Finance Committee, Councillor Dubanow.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. So this evening we have a presentation from Mr. Jansen, Director of Corporate Services. Floor is yours, Mr. Jansen.
Thank you, Chair. Welcome everyone to this is our second meeting for 2020. Focusing tonight on the water and wastewater budget. As well in the package for tonight is the user fees and charges report CBC 03, which we'll be considering later in the evening as well. The presentations are available on the town's website should anyone wish to follow along. So tonight's agenda is similar to in the past, where we'll be looking at the different aspects of service delivery. We'll review the budget inputs as well as the methods and ways we go about determining the rates. Look at risks and opportunities, and we'll conclude with some of the summary impacts for the average household, as well as next steps in the budget process. And then we'll open up the floor for any discussion and questions. So our Fort Erie water and wastewater system, we have approximately 13,460 customers, of which 95% are residential and the remaining 5% are ICI, which is institutional, commercial, or industrial. The system has 276 kilometers of water mains, 196 kilometers of sanitary sewers, and then various other things such as valves, hydrants, flushing and sampling units, and maintenance chambers. All in, based on the asset management plan we brought forward this year, all our assets have a replacement cost of $308 million. So an extensive system. The system is also governed by the Safe Drinking Water Act, and that sets out all the requirements that the operations must meet. One important aspect of that legislation is for the system to have full cost recovery, separate from taxes. So with that as well, staff submit plans to the ministry to devise how the town has a long-term financial plan in place to avoid deferring costs to future generations. For the system, staff are committed to a system that has reliable availability, flow, and pressure. Those are a few of the key indicators of what we're providing to our customers, as well as a quality of life that eliminates basement flooding and sewer backups, particularly associated with extraneous flow of the wastewater system. It protects the natural environment and balances all of this with minimizing costs while considering long-term planning. Here's just a couple photos to give you a glimpse into some of the day-to-day operations of our water and wastewater teams. On the left, staff are in action performing a water service repair, and on the right is the hydrant flushing program. So as a council, municipal officials have certain responsibilities to support the commitment to the drinking water quality management system, which includes maintaining compliance and continuous improvement. Council was given the Ministry of Environment publication that outlines Council's role with respect to the Safe Drinking Water Act, as well as standard of care presentations. Training sessions were coordinated by the region earlier in 2019 to provide a forum to learn and to ask questions about Council's role. Our support of the system is really through three different departments. The key building blocks are the departments of corporate and community services, which provide the ongoing billing and collection efforts, as well as accounting and finance. which fulfill some of the requirements, such as the financial planning pieces required by the province. As well, customer service provides customer service primarily through our customer service unit at Town Hall here, as well as IT support from our digital services team. Infrastructure services is, of course, led by Mr. Kelly Walsh. It includes engineering and capital works programs, as well as the water and wastewater division that carries out the daily operations and maintenance. These components all must be funded by the water and wastewater rate itself. And it just shows how it's a very broad and joint effort to bring these services to be. This is a old town graphic that paints a picture of the extent of the system. For those watching, there's a legend at the bottom that outlines a number of the key infrastructure pieces that are involved in providing water to the customers. So it snakes from the top left, the water source, all the way through to the various stages, including treatment, monitoring, pumping stations, rechlorination, and ultimately to the customers. And it does demonstrate, we do like to portray this every year of the impacts and the extent of the system, and how many of those costs don't depend on the number of people consuming water in the end. So whether it's a single senior or a larger family, the impacts through the system to get to those homes are very extensive. Some operational commitments of our system. Legislatively, as I mentioned already, municipalities are subject to some quite a few provincial requirements. There is ongoing internal audits of our system, and there's scrutiny from outside agencies, whether it be the surveillance audit by an accreditation body, which the town has been very successful with, as well as compliance audits by the Ministry of Environment. The town is committed to reducing infiltration to the sanitary and sewer system. As you would have seen back in November 6th with the capital program, there's ongoing efforts to address and replace old sewer pipes. In particular, vitrified clay is one that is not good for infiltration as it deteriorates quickly over time. So the town is continuing to invest in those areas, such as the recently completed Nye Road sewer shed relining and the commencement of the Shirley Road sewer shed works as well this year. For extraneous flow, the second last bullet there, the town has a number of has targeted areas over the years. For example, this year and next year we'll be continuing with Crystal Beach area. This includes visiting the sewer shed by a pumping station and inspecting the integrity of household plumbing systems to look for contributions or cross connections. So the town does video works there as well, just to make sure that any issues that are uncovered are addressed. And then the last point there is an operational commitments to ensuring that new development construction meets the Ministry of Environment standards to minimize infiltration as well. Ongoing, staff have a priority to leverage any and all funding opportunities, such as the regional CSO or combined sewer overflow program. These amounts, depending on the nature of them, are not necessarily included in the budget due to their competitive application process. The town was successful in 2019 for a number of CSO programs with revenues over $700,000, and as well the Ontario Community Infrastructure Fund or OCIF programs. The town applies for those when available as well. The non-revenue water volumes, the town continues to target and report annually to council on that issue as well. This also just has a number of capital strategic priorities associated with it. The water main replacement Approximately half of the town's distribution system is either cast iron or asbestos cement, which again is deteriorating quickly over age. So there's efforts to address that, and as well as costs to identify leak locations on both the town and the region system. The town recently completed the residential water meter exchange program in 2018 and 19, and is realizing improvements in reduced unbilled water volumes due to the newer technology that has, and with more accurate meters. And then lastly, an ongoing focus on leak detection, tracking and operation and maintenance programs. This is something the town staff take very seriously. Any water main breaks are addressed immediately, around the clock, and a lot of aggressive efforts to address those issues. Some operational challenges, some stay the same, some are improving. Recruitments in an aging workforce continue to be something that the staff is aware of and looking towards with some succession planning. With water main breaks, that's been the key metric for determining the long-term level of service for our water system. There were 40 main breaks in 2018, which was already reduced compared to historical averages of 50 per year. And again, this year, the town is tracking well to be below that average. There's a tracking system for the legislative requirements for new water projects that I mentioned earlier. And then as well, just the challenge of transitioning to focus on the commercial and industrial meter replacement program, which can be more complex, but will definitely be part of enhancing our system safety and accuracy. And then lastly, the outstanding work orders regarding meter and billing issues. The town, in coordination between both finance and operations, continue to communicate and are going to be stepping up efforts regarding that to ensure any meter reading issues, particularly now that the town is providing all of its own meter reading, that those are coordinated and addressed in a timely fashion as these have grown over the years. So that's an overview of the delivery system itself. The financial components and concepts are a function of expenses and other revenues. In Section A, we'll be looking at the regional treatment costs and volumes, town expenses separate from the region for all the components listed earlier for operations and billing and other revenues, as well as financing and transfers. The town has both an operating and capital reserve for each of the water and wastewater and uses those to mitigate year-to-year changes. The rate setting exercise then looks at distributing those costs with two main considerations: customer volumes, and then the billing methodology, which is a balance between base charges and variable charges. So for 2020, this pie chart shows the breakdown of total expenses being $19.6 million. So the regional treatment costs are over half of the cost at 58%. And then the others followed by the infrastructure reserve contributions, both again for operating and capital that I mentioned, wages and benefits at 11%, materials and supplies of 7%, which includes the program support allocations from the other departments, and then debt costs of 2%. The largest change for 2020, as you can tell from the previous slide, relates to the regional treatment costs, and for 2020, it's an increase in the budget of $440,000 or 2.33%. This is driven by the region rates. The region had their budget review committee of the whole meeting on November 28th and approved a 5.15% increase, which was approved last year's budget as well for a targeted increase for each of the next 10 years. So this is broken down as a water budget impact of 3.8% and a wastewater impact or increase of 6%. So the combined average of those two increasing is 5.15. Part of the increase this year is not as bad as it may otherwise have been or would have been due to some of our proportionate share of volumes. So we're pleased to see that in terms of our treatment costs, our water volume share is down 2.8%, and then our wastewater volume share is also down just slightly. And then included in the future 5-year forecasts for each of the years 2021 to 25 is that 5.15% increase that we are expecting the region to continue to bring forward. This is just a reminder of the ways that the region does bill the lower tier municipalities for their wholesale costs of the treatment. The water is a 75% variable charge and 25% fixed, and the wastewater charge is 100% fixed, and that is adjusted in the third year following any year's actual, which allows, it's the method that municipalities agreed upon as the best way to be able to actually be charged for your actual costs and yet not have to experience swings in any given year. It gives municipalities 3 years to adapt to those changes in wastewater volumes. For 2020, the reconciliation is based on actual flows from 2018, and it's a credit to the town of $189,000 as volumes works lower than estimated. For 2021, our estimate is a small credit at this point from the numbers we have based on year-to-date actual flows. Expenses and other revenue has a total small change of $15,499 or 0.07%, so quite small this year. This includes all the items in Appendix 2 of the report CBC-02 if you want to follow along with any specific breakdowns there. Some revenues are increasing this year, including grants and fees. The wages and benefits are tracking in line with the town's collective bargaining agreement and benefits rates, which is 2% for 2020. Increased overhead costs relate to some of the other departmental costs mentioned of corporate services and community services, which includes things like legal, customer service, finance. Reduction in debt charges is small of about $7,000, and there's no debt maturing during the year. And then the last bullet there is for increased materials and services, which is approximately $21,000 for this year. And it does include some larger projects, such as an investigation of non-revenue water and extraneous service flows, with a CCTV program of $205,000 that was identified in the asset management plan. However, this was included with reserve funding as the asset management plan did provide for capital funding for that. The town offers 2 programs which have been around for approximately 10 years. This provides assistance to those that need it most in relation to customers of our water and wastewater system. The Water Emergency Relief Fund, or WERF, provides a budget of $15,000 for low-income families. The Seniors Utility Relief Fund has a budget of $21,000 for low-income seniors, of which $20,000 was allocated in 2019 for that purpose. There are other programs in the operations section, such as an extraneous flow lateral replacement program as well. As mentioned with the reserves, the 2 operating reserves for water and wastewater are similar to what we use with our levy. They're called rate stabilization reserves, and they are really key to mitigating changes or annual increases with our system. We are anticipating some predictability at this point with the regional budgeted increases. As I showed you earlier with the treatment costs, there can be swings in our proportionate share, which can exacerbate the impact on the budget from the treatment costs, as well as the reconciliation charges The town has also used these rate stabilization reserves in not the last couple of years, but before that for a few years of operating deficits. So definitely key to ensuring a smooth operation of our system. And just the balances I have here for those reserves. The 2020 sewer rate stabilization reserve opens with an estimated $700,000. And the water rate stabilization reserve opens 2020 with approximately $760,000. And the town, particularly this year with having more advanced notice of the regional changes, was able to adapt the budget to use and draw on those reserves to mitigate, as this slide says, the impacts of those increases. So with the financing and transfers, the increases in the budget is $464,000 or 2.45%. $225,000 contribution is also coming from the rate stabilization reserves. And this will be partly used, funded by projected 2019 surplus, which the third quarter report came forward last month, showing an overall combined projected surplus of approximately $300,000. There's an increased transfer to the sewer rate stabilization reserve of $189,000. So when combined with the fact that last year there was funding from the reserve to fund a reconciliation charge, the difference is an increase there of $517,000. And then lastly, there are some proposed increases to capital contributions that were noted in the budget guidance report that followed from the 2017 Water Master Plan and the 2019 Wastewater Master Plan. So an increase of $50,000 for water and $100,000 for wastewater related to long-term capital needs. Some minor impacts this year, nothing major from the capital budget, but as council would have seen in the appendix to the capital budget, there were some new water and wastewater capital assets that had operating impacts of just over $6,000. And then this is just a listing of all the existing master servicing plans that not only in this presentation, but in capital and throughout the year that the town staff are referencing and relying on the master plans for each of the water and wastewater, as well as the asset management plan, which was completed this last summer. And as well, the development charges, which the bylaw came forward back in March of this year, also identifies funding for new or growth capital projects. This slide summarizes the changes of those capital contributions. So I've added a few new columns this year just to show the 2019 actual contributions, which would have provided 88% of the funding towards the long-term capital needs. And then in columns 2 and 3, those are the changes that I mentioned. So the $152,000 is the $150,000 from water is actually two components. The $50,000 increase noted on the prior slide, as well as $100,000 in funding that as infrastructure services staff looked at our long-term water meter refurbishing needs, we're able to thankfully reduce that from $500,000 a year to $100,000 a year. So that water meter funding that was deemed to be excess is now going towards long-term water capital needs. So that combined with the $50,000 and as new amortization from the capital budget is the $152,000. And then the wastewater, as mentioned, was $100,000 plus $4,000 for amortization identified in the capital budget. The town does include inflation for based on the existing base contributions to capital. So using the budget guidance report of 2.1% on top of the 2019 contributions, that adds $77,000 to get us to the proposed 2020 of just over $4 million or 95% of the target contribution. So This, compared to where we were last year at this time, in not having as much information and not knowing where we may end up, certainly this is great news in knowing that the town is very close to being at fully funded for the infrastructure gap. Just a note, as was discussed with the asset management plan, and that's the asterisk at the bottom there, is that with the wastewater capital increases, this is being used over the next number of years to provide more condition assessment data. So what the consultant did say is at that point, we will need to reevaluate somewhat. Things could be worse or things could be better than we anticipated with the limited data we had at that point. So we will reevaluate at that point. So just being a bit cautious there. So the budget overall increases from 18.9 million with all the changes discussed, totaling $402,000 to be a total rate revenue of $19.3 million or 2.13%. And this is just another way of looking at those changes, both for the net town costs, which is an overall slight decrease year over year of 0.14%. And then the region costs increasing at $430,000 or 2.27% to be a total increase of 2.13% of the budget. So that then we distribute those costs over, and this is where we do the rate setting exercise to determine how we collect those charges. We estimate the customer consumption volumes and come up with the base or the variable rate, and we'll compare those in a moment. So the total revenue between the two, based on the costs we've presented, is a 56% required to be from the wastewater billings and 42% from water billings, which recovers all the costs that we've discussed till now. Small 1% revenues from local improvement charges, and then a further 1% from interest, penalties, and user fees. So with consumption volumes, this is something we talk about every year where consumption volumes, despite having more customers in our system, have been following a downward trend where actual volumes that we can charge for every homeowner or from homeowners is actually decreasing over time. So for water, the volume we've used in our calculation is 2.7 million meters cubed. That's a decrease of 1.1% over last year's volumes. And this does get us very close to the 3-year average. So we're always tracking and seeing where we think consumption will go, because to the extent that part of our billings are based on consumption, we need to estimate that. For wastewater, it's in a similar position where the trend is decreasing, and I'll show you a graph in just a moment. So the volumes there are 2.42 million cubic meters, which is, again, a decrease of 1% over last year. So in this graph, you can see how the blue line is the budgeted volumes for water, and the red has been the actual. So 2019 for actual is the projected to the end of the year. In 2020, actuals, of course, we don't have. But you can see how in both the cases of the water, with the top 2 lines, and the wastewater in the bottom 2 lines, we're always in a race to catch up with where volumes are going. And despite growth in the town, these have been decreasing. I will skip over that and just go to the summary of the base charges. So for the town, we are targeting to have base charges represent approximately half of customer billings. So for 2020, the combined monthly base would be $66.74. That's an increase of 1% over 2019. In Niagara, the base average is 42% of the monthly bill. So for Fort Erie, 2019 was 55, 2020 is 54, and then by 2023, we will reach 50%, so parity between both the base and the variable charge. For the base, Fort Erie was the second highest charge in Niagara in 2019. And certainly, as we've shown in the past, there's a number of challenges due to geology and geography in our town, with particularly with having one of the lowest customers per kilometer of infrastructure. So we do compare municipalities in Niagara here for the total municipal burden. Part of that is because not all municipalities have the same approach to full cost recovery. There's quite a bit of variation we see with the way that program support costs are allocated. Certainly there's a wide variation in where municipalities are at with the infrastructure gaps. So when you compare the Fort Erie's water and wastewater bill with the taxes, you can see that the average is the yellow bar, which is $4,679 for Niagara, and Fort Erie's is just 1.6% over that, or $4,753. So you can see quite a variation there. Again, there are a couple municipalities missing, whether it be Waynfleet as they don't have a water system, or Grimsby as their numbers weren't available. So the volume rate is a per cubic meter charge, and it's proposed to increase from $3.347, $3.347 per meter cubed to 3.475 for 2020. And the combined volumetric rate for Niagara has an average of 3.206, which ranges anywhere from 2.318 to 4.789, so quite a range there. Town of Fort Erie 2020 rate of 3.475 is above the 2019 average. I won't go through all the calculation here, but if anyone's interested, this shows how the different components are used to calculate those charges. More detail there than for tonight perhaps, but that is part of the calculation. And similarly for the wastewater. And so when we combine all of those factors, the expenses, the revenues, and then setting the rates based on projected volumes, it results in an overall net increase for the average household of 2.05%. So this is just less than the 2.1% CPI rate that was referenced in the budget guidance report. And so that's equates to approximately $2.46 increase per month, or $30 per year. Broken down further, the household cost is $4.02 per day. This is all based on 16 cubic meters for the average consumption. Looking back over the last 5 years, here you can see the rate changes the town has approved, dating back to 2015, which is very similar to this year, and then 16, 17, 18, and 19. The average for this period is 3.1%, so this year is lower than that. The 5-year forecast the town will be submitting with the financial plan to the province is approximately 4.05% per year. It includes the regional increase of 5.15, so below that rate. We have forecasted some reserve funding with future years to the extent that there may be opportunities to increase that funding in years where we have a surplus. Certainly the town will be actively looking at that and bringing that forward to mitigate any in-year increase. Risks inherent in the system, the weather certainly, with having a variable rate based on consumption. Weather certainly we have seen plays a large factor in impacting that. With having a volumetric and a base rate system, of course, there's revenue risks then related to that. We've discussed the wastewater treatment impacts, consumer shifts. This is impacted considerably from shifts from residential to or shifts by larger consumers. Billing frequency, we've talked in the past, brought forward 2 reports in the last 8 years or so discussing the billing frequency, and the recommendation at the time, it was based on, or is in line with the American Water Works Association, I believe, AWWA, the best practices, and it does assist in a number of identified areas such as leak detection and customer cash flow. Legislative compliance, we've discussed a bit. Reserves, the risk is that as we draw these down, that there are other needs that may emerge that we can adapt to. Right now, the town is slightly below provincial averages for reserve balances, but we're also in a very good annual contribution position. And then lastly, the comparisons of having a relatively high residential and low non-residential rate. So while we do have a relatively high residential rate, when we do look at reports across the province, the non-residential, so the industrial, the commercial rates have shown to be near or below provincial averages. Some opportunities. So in the past, when we've looked at making adjustments, even in the evening of the budget itself, we just like to keep in mind that $203,000 for 2020 results in a 1% rate change to customers. So when it comes to that 2.05%, a $203,000 change would result in a 1% change to that rate. With the town, of course, continues to apply for grants. The meter changeout program was approved in the 2020 capital budget at $350,000. And the extraneous flow program, the town continues to attack that to reduce issues. And pictured is an example of staff discovering a sump pump connected to a sewer lateral. So it's an example of an opportunity where, as we do these programs and to reduce extraneous flow, these types of things have the opportunity to reduce our costs. Some context for what typical North American water usage is. It's about a fifth for each of the main components for drinking water, for showering, and so on. And just some context with the factor of the town's rate. If you want to think of it in terms of a per liter charge, the town's water rate combined with the wastewater, so flushing it as well, is about 0.35 cents per liter. So in conclusion, the town costs are decreasing slightly at 0.14%. Region increase of 2.27% for a combined budget increase of 2.13%. So when we distribute that for a rate, it results in an increase for households of 2.05%. The final rate structure has yet to be approved by Regional Council, by bylaw, so that is something we will monitor and confirm once that is complete. There are a number of resources anytime you have questions, or if the community is interested in information about our water and wastewater system. There's 19 frequently asked questions available on the town website, a whole host of options for looking at rates and general water information. And then just lastly, the recommendation is on the cover of report CBC 02. Next steps are for the budget process. On Monday, we'll have on December 9th, the preliminary capital budget bylaw approval. But then following that, for the water and wastewater and the user fees, the bylaws are scheduled for January 20th. And then the levy meeting for the consolidated town budget with library reports and presentation is scheduled for January 22nd and possibly January 29th. And that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jansen. So I'll open up the floor to council if they have any questions for Mr. Jansen. Your worship.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for the in-depth presentation. I want to congratulate Jonathan and really the senior staff for being able to put us in this position where we're at a point, I don't think there's any other municipality in Niagara that's remotely close to covering their infrastructure gap. And once water and wastewater is covered, we'll have all, I believe, of our infrastructure assets covered in terms of infrastructure gap. But I did in view of the fact, this may be puzzling to residents, and I'd maybe just like a little clarification, if we could move to slides 21 and 22, how the region can increase water and wastewater combined 5.15% and take up 59% of our budget, but we still end up with them only having a 2.27% impact. I wonder if you could explain how that all works when you take into account the impact of flows on 3-year average, particularly with respect to sewers.
Through you, Chair, to the Mayor. Yeah, this year we benefited definitely from some changes in our projections for the amount of treated water, treated both water and wastewater costs. So while the $440,000 increase, the $430,000 increase is only a 2.27% overall of the town's budget, it's lessened because our water consumption is actually able to go down. So while if all things were the same as last year from our volumes, then we would have expected that to be a full 5.15% year over year. So in both the case of the water and wastewater, our proportionate share amongst all the Niagara municipalities decreased.
So if I might, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Your Worship.
So there are years, though, however, where we're actually penalized when we do the 3-year average, because we've had years where there's been a lot of water that's infiltrated into our sewer system, as an example, which increases our treatment costs on the sewer side. Is that correct?
That's correct. So there's not only the 3-year reconciliation charge, but there's also the single year change. So the amount that we're given this year for wastewater treatment is based on that new 3-year average. So last year, in 2019, the wastewater treatment charges for Fort Erie were approximately 10.1% of the overall Niagara charges. And for 2020, we're separate from the reconciliation charge, our share of that decreased to 10%.
Right.
And that was a little bit more exaggerated on the water side.
And if I might, Mr. Chair, when one looks at the chart that you had up showing the rate history and forecast, some of the fluctuations would relate to the fact that we have some years significant amounts of rain, which would reduce the water consumption but significantly increase sewer treatment costs. Is that correct?
That is right, especially when you look at, that's more looking at the actual results in any given year. The budget, those years was more a function, I think, through certain areas of, we did hire more staff in one of those years, and our proportionate share, again, similar to this, in this case, benefiting a bit from a decrease. We did have a couple of years where it was a larger proportionate increase. But yeah, certainly weather is a large factor.
So if I might, Mr. Chair, when looking at slide 22, the takeaway for people should be that the town's share of the water and sewer bill is actually static. It's actually slightly down from last year. The increase is really as a result of the region's costs that we have to levy to our customers.
It wouldn't be static. It's more, I would describe it more as the town's net treatment costs would go up 5.15%, but for the fact that our share has been shown to go down year over year, that's why we're in the 3.84% year over year increase.
If I'm looking at slide 22, which I'm looking at, it says town net cost 0.14% in brackets. That's a negative number, isn't it? So if you subtract that from the region's net cost increase of 2.27%, we get an average budget increase of 2.13%. So doesn't that mean that the town's portion actually, if there was no region, wouldn't the town's portion actually be the same, slightly less than last year?
Sorry, you're correct. That's right.
Okay, I don't want to make
I
this too
thought you meant if
complicated.
the region's rate was staying, if we were following the full region increase of 5.15, but you're right, the town's portion alone is a small net decrease.
And if the region wasn't bent on increasing the water by 3.6% per year for the next 9 years and sewer by 6% for the next 9 years, a combined 5.15%, this wouldn't be a 2.13% increase. It would be something lower, perhaps even less than 2%. Is that correct? And the town's net cost is despite the fact that the town has been able to move towards covering the infrastructure gap on both water and wastewater. And if I might, Mr. Chair, in terms of infrastructure, is it fair to say, Mr. Jansen, that part of the reason that the water and sewer bills in Fort Erie are slightly higher than some of the other area municipalities is because of the fact that our infrastructure is in the condition that it is and that we have addressed the financing needed for the long-term maintenance of our infrastructure?
Absolutely. The town has been doing the right thing and been very strategic for a number of years, which puts us in a very good position going forward.
And Mr. Chair, I think it's also commendable that people are reducing the amount of water that they're using. The difficulty is that as they use less water, we still have the same infrastructure to maintain so that the prices naturally go up. However, as the community grows, we should be able to have more houses per mile or kilometer, which should affect that. Anyways, those were the comments that I wanted, or questions that I wanted to ask as well. And that's why I think staff needs to be congratulated for putting us in such a good state, not just this year, but over the years to get us to the point that we're at. Thank you.
No, and I completely agree with you, Your Worship, on that. Did you have anything else?
No, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Councillor Zanko, and then I'll go to Councillor Noyes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Mr. Jansen. With regard to page 16 of your slide, the relief programs, I was just curious to see how much of the relief program budget was used in 2018.
Through you, Chair, to Councillor Zanko. For the Water Emergency Relief Fund, that was year to date, the town has spent $8,000. And for the seniors utility, year to date is $20,000.
Perfect. And one other question through you, Mr. Chair. Is that information going to be posted on our website like we normally have it for residents to take advantage of this?
The seniors utility relief program is on the town's website. It has an annual October 31st deadline. The Water Emergency Relief Fund is a bit different. It's a referral program through either by the town or through the Salvation Army, and we have an advertiser posted that online. The eligibility requirements are the same as the regional program, the Niagara Emergency Energy Fund. So because it's administered by a third party, because of the nature of it, it is more through referral.
One last question, if
Certainly.
I might. So with regard to the seniors utility relief program, given the fact that 20,000 was used last year and the budget is 21,000, are we at a point where, I know there's still $1,000 available, but will there be a point where we have to look at increasing that?
We have tracked that for many years. I don't think we denied any eligible recipients. So for now, that does appear to be sufficient. I think this is one of those areas where if we found we did have more than that apply, we would certainly be sympathetic to that and consider, in that instance, looking for ways to reallocate funds to fund that additional rebating.
Excellent. And just a comment, thank you to you and your staff. You have done an amazing job on this.
Thank you, Councillor Zanko. Councillor Noyes.
Thank you, Councillor Dubanow. A few questions. My favorite question about billing frequency. Last year, you guys it was commented that, yes, we were in the minority billing monthly, but that there's a number of other municipalities that were going to change from every other month to every third month to monthly. And I'm just wondering how many of those municipalities have changed to the monthly billing?
I don't have that information. We did go back and check what our basis and rationale was for maintaining the monthly back when it was last reviewed, but I'd have to get back to you with any kind of comparisons with that.
Okay, I would appreciate it. The other question I have is, and I think the mayor touched base on it, we have an increase in population, an increase in number of homes, and one of the earlier slides you talked about the problem is that we have so many miles or kilometers of sewer and water and fewer houses. Like the ratio is much higher. Has that ratio been reconfigured this past year?
That graph, actually, I took out this year. In the past, we've shown it. It's based on information that was unfortunately removed from the annual financial information return. We used to be able to quite easily get that information. We don't have that anymore. It hasn't been updated, I think, in about 4 or 5 years, if I'm correct. So we would expect, there to be some minor changes with that as municipalities grow at different rates. But generally speaking, our expectation is we would be one of the lowest with the number of customers or connections per kilometer.
Thank you. One further question. In regards to the illegal hookups, how many have we found in the past, let's say, year?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I know I don't have that number, but in the Shirley Road sewer shed, which was our past target area, there were a significant number, both private and issues with our own system that we picked up.
Okay, thank you. And again, I do appreciate all the work that went into this. And I can definitely support a budget that is only a 2.15% increase in $30 per year. I think you've done a great job, and so has the staff. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Noyes. Did any other members of council have questions for Mr. Jansen? I just had one question. I think the mayor touched on a very important point about the town portion of the costs versus the regional portion, and it was very I appreciate the mayor highlighting how the town's portion is actually dropping, and that could be related to population or other things. But it's the region where we're getting that upward pressure and why we're seeing these budget increases. And I can appreciate the challenges the region has and why they're there, but they're there nonetheless. I think this question came up last year, and I'm just wondering, has there been any effort perhaps to communicate this to residents on water bills or anything like that, just so that they're made aware that, from the municipal perspective, I think we're doing a pretty good job, and that's a testament to all of our staff here, but that these challenges are being, placed upon us by a higher level of government. And is there any efforts underway to ensure that residents are aware of that?
Yeah, last year we did, I think as part of our media release, did highlight some of those differences and the different pressures. We will consider that again just to make sure our customers understand the different sources of those pressures. As well as our website does comment on the two-tier and the regional treatment costs as well. So we will consider that as well for this year.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jansen. I think that would be excellent. Councillor Noyes, was there something you wanted to add? Yeah, I'll go back to Councillor Noyes before we move on.
I just wondered about the potable water. How are those rates affected at all? Like those who purchase the water from the rural areas?
Oh, okay. So I think you're referring to the bulk water costs. That's a good question, and maybe infrastructure services would know how if the rate is calculated in the same way as our volume charge. Yes, it is okay. I'm getting the nodding heads. Yes, it is. It is the same impact as our volume rate.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jansen. So we'll move on now to the report. So we have CBC-02-2020. We get a mover for that, Your Worship. So that report's on the floor. Do any members of council have any questions, comments? All right, so I'm seeing none, so I'll call the question. All those in favor? So none opposed, so that carries. So we'll now move on to CBC-03-2020. That's the 2020 fees and charges. Can we get a mover for that? Councillor Zanko. Comments, questions from council? Your Worship.
Yes, I just have a little bit of anxiety with respect to the fire services changes that are being proposed. There's a lot of them. Some of them are brand new charges. Some of them seem significant, but there may very well be explanations, and I know some of these charges will probably be paid ultimately by insurance companies, but I'm not completely sure about that. Can we just get a bit of an explanation as to just in general, why this approach is being taken? Obviously, it's going to generate revenue, and it's going to cover the costs of the services being provided, but some of them seem to be quite large.
Yeah, Chief Melanson, would you like to take that question?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the Mayor. This is part of the province's three-pronged approach. The first was public education, which we've made a concerted effort through our smoke alarm program and our public education division. The second part is the fire prevention portion. So we took a hard look at the fee schedule, where it was, and what it was doing for not only how it affected or impacted our department, but what it meant to the business owners, multi-residential occupancy owners, etc. And really what we found is that the fire department in the past, and I'll be quite frank, ran more like a babysitting service than it did a fire prevention division. So what was happening is that a business license would come in, which the business owner pays for. We would go visit, have findings. Those findings we would rate order to repair, and we would go back multiple times with no effect to the business owner on the costs that were related by the fire department or incurred by the fire department going back and forth. So what we did in its place, and that's what the fee schedule recommendations are before you, is we're not looking to penalize anyone. We're looking at this as part of an education process where the business owner at the time of application will get a checklist of things we're looking for. We will educate to make sure that they're on the right page before we go. So they'll phone, they'll make an appointment for us to go. We'll make sure that they have everything in order by phone. And then when we go and visit, it should be the last visit that we have, and we just check that they're good to go. So it's more about trying to use our resources better to meet that second pillar, to use the fire prevention officers that I have to do other things like high rises, hospitals, the things that are coming to our town, schools, etc. It's about using the resources we have, recovering those costs, and educating our business owners further.
Thank you, Chief. Your worship.
Yeah, just a couple of questions to follow that up. So are some of these requests for inspections by the fire department voluntary, or are they mandatory?
Chief.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the mayor. Some are voluntary, and we've highlighted those in the way that the fees are written. So if requested, it'll say in it. And that's, say, a industrial group asking for training. If they need that, then we have invoiced in the past. It hasn't been clear on what should be done, so we've tried to clarify those. Some are like vulnerable occupancy inspections. They're mandated by legislation that we must do them annually. We won't charge for those annual fire drills, inspections, etc. However, if they fail, because they know what has to be met, etc., if they fail and we have to go back, then there'll be a fee for us to go back and do that. So if it's mandated, we're not going to charge them unless we have to go back for a visit. It's the same as fire safety plans. There's many, especially multiple residential, greater than 10 must have a fire safety plan. We review those fire safety plans for free. But if we have to look at that fire safety plan again after we've given them the template, instructed them what to do, helped them put it together, and they come back and it's not right, when we review it the second time, there will be a fee for that.
So I guess this is similar to the situation where you have false alarms at institutions. First one free, after that they're charged.
It's correct. We actually have 4 times free. At the third one, they get a registered letter letting them know what's going on. And the fourth one, they get notification that everyone after that, they'll be charged.
Do they get a reduction in incidents after a period of time so they can, kind of like losing points on your driving?
Yes, sir. It appears to be working, and we have discussed this with a lot of business owners. They understand why we're doing what we're doing. There'll be the odd one that isn't happy, I'm sure, but generally speaking, I think that it'll make this a safer community.
Right, thank you. Mr. Chair, I noticed that we're talking here maybe about $25,000 in total in terms of revenue, but I think it would be helpful if next year, presuming this passes, next year when we come back for the budget, we get an idea of whether expectations in terms of services provided were met or whether there was a reduction, and I guess that would be addressed in the report. And I don't think there's anything here that would necessarily affect housing in terms of affordable housing, but if there is anything, perhaps the fire chief could alert us to that.
Sounds good. You get that, Chief?
Yes, I have that.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. Any other members of council, questions or comments about the report? All right, so I'll call the question. All those in favor? I see none opposed, so that carries. So, just go here. I guess at that point, I think we're done with the presentations and the report, so I'll hand the chair back to you, Your Worship.
Thank you very much, Councillor Dubanow. That was very efficient. So the next meeting that we have with respect to budgets is January the 22nd, 2020. We'll be considering the general levy operating budget and assessment analysis, as well as the library budget. And I'll entertain a motion for adjournment. Councillor McDermott. All those in favor? Passed.